The shuttle doors opened, and Monroe took her first step onto the Galactic Coalition Academy station. The air smelled different here. It was clean and recycled, and carried the faint scent of species she had never encountered before. She was 22 years old, and she had trained her entire life for this moment. But nothing could have prepared her for the way the aliens looked at her when she walked through the arrival terminal. A group of cadets stood near the registration desk. They were massive creatures, standing nearly 8 feet tall with gray armored skin and 4 eyes that tracked her movement like predators watching prey. One of them said something in their rumbling language, and the others laughed. Did not need a translator to understand they were laughing at her. Humans had only joined the Galactic Coalition 15 years ago. In the grand scale of interstellar politics, that was barely a heartbeat. They had been members for over 3 centuries. They had built the academy. They had written the training protocols. They had dominated the military rankings for as long as anyone could remember, and they did not think humans belonged here. Collected her registration documents and followed the signs to the human dormitory wing. It was a small section of the station, tucked away in a corner that felt almost like an afterthought. The corridors were narrower here, built to human proportions rather than the massive hallways that accommodated larger species. She found her assigned room and pressed her palm to the door panel. The room was small but functional. 2 beds, 2 desks, 2 storage lockers. A girl was already sitting on one of the beds, reading something on a tablet. She looked up when entered and her face showed relief. "You must be," the girl said. "I am Harper. I got here 2 weeks ago." Set her bag down on the empty bed. "How is it so far?" His expression told her everything she needed to know before she even spoke. "It is hard. The training is intense, but that is not the worst part. The worst part is how they treat us. The especially. They think we are weak. They think we do not belong here." Had expected this. Earth's military commanders had warned every human cadet about what they would face. The coalition needed warriors, and humans wanted to prove they could contribute. But proving yourself to species that had been fighting wars among the stars while humans were still figuring out agriculture was not going to be easy. "What about the instructors?" asked. "Most of them are fair. They grade based on performance. But the main combat instructor is. His name is. He is a veteran of the Periphery Wars, and he has made it very clear that he thinks human cadets are a waste of his time." Unpacked her things in silence. She had known this would be difficult. She had known she would face prejudice and doubt and mockery. But knowing something and experiencing it were 2 different things. She could already feel the weight of expectation pressing down on her shoulders. She was not just representing herself here. She was representing her entire species. The next morning she reported to Combat Training Hall 7 for her first integrated session. The hall was enormous. The ceiling stretched up 50 feet, and the walls were lined with observation galleries where senior officers could watch training exercises. The floor was covered with reinforced training mats designed to absorb impacts from species much larger and heavier than humans. 20 cadets from 6 different species stood in formation when arrived. She took her place at the end of the line next to and tried to make herself invisible. It did not work. Instructor entered through the main doors and the room fell silent. He was even larger than the cadets had seen at the terminal. His gray skin was covered with ritual scars that marked decades of combat experience. His 4 eyes swept across the assembled cadets like searchlights and stopped when they reached. "Another human," he said. His voice was a deep rumble that the translator rendered into flat, emotionless English. "Your government continues to send your kind despite all evidence that you cannot compete at this level. I wonder how many of you must fail before they accept reality." Said nothing. She kept her eyes forward and her expression neutral. Reacting would only make things worse. The training session began with basic conditioning exercises: running, climbing, obstacle courses. The exercises were scaled for different species, but even the scaled version pushed to her limits. The cadets finished the course in half the time it took her. They were not even breathing hard when she crossed the finish line. During the break, one of the cadets approached her. He was younger than the others, with lighter gray skin and eyes that held a particular kind of arrogance. Would later learn his name was, and his father was a general in the military command. "You are slow," said, standing close enough that she had to crane her neck to look at his face. "You are small. You are fragile. Why do you think you can be a warrior?" Met his 4 eyes without flinching. "Because I am here." Laughed. It was not a friendly sound. Being here means nothing. Surviving here means everything, and humans do not survive. He walked away before she could respond. Appeared at her side, her face pale. "That is, his father is famous. He has been telling everyone that he is going to prove humans do not belong in the coalition military. He wants to make an example of one of us." Watched rejoin his friends. They were all looking at her and laughing. She thought about what her grandfather had told her before she left Earth. He had been a Marine, decorated in 3 wars. He had spent his whole life fighting enemies who underestimated him. "The bigger they are," he had said, "the harder they fall. And the ones who rely on their size never learn to fight smart. That is their weakness. Remember that." Remembered. She did not know when or how she would use that knowledge, but she knew that eventually would push her too far. And when that happened, she would show him exactly what humans were capable of. The first day ended and returned to her room exhausted. Her muscles ached and her pride was bruised, but she was still here. She had not quit, she had not broken, and tomorrow she would wake up and do it all again. That was what humans did. They endured, they adapted, they refused to stay down no matter how many times they got knocked down. They did not understand that yet, but they would learn. 3 weeks passed and learned to live in a state of constant alertness. The academy was not just about training, it was about survival. Every day brought new challenges and new opportunities for the cadets to remind humans of their place in the hierarchy. The harassment was subtle at first. Equipment that was not properly calibrated for human size, training schedules that changed without notice, comments made in alien languages that the translators conveniently failed to render. But as the weeks went on, the harassment became more direct. Was the worst. He had made his personal project. He would bump into her in the corridors hard enough to send her stumbling. He would make comments about human weakness during training sessions loud enough for everyone to hear. He would stand too close and use his massive size to intimidate her whenever the instructors were not watching. Endured it all. She kept her head down and focused on her training. Her scores were improving. She was learning how to compensate for her physical disadvantages with technique and intelligence, but she could feel her patience wearing thin. The 6th combat training session started like all the others. Instructor divided the cadets into pairs for sparring exercises, was assigned to work with a cadet, a 4-armed creature about her own size. It was a fair match. She was actually looking forward to it. Then spoke up. "Instructor," he called out, his voice echoing through the training hall. "The human should train with someone who can actually challenge her. She will learn nothing from fighting I volunteer to be her partner." The hall went quiet. Every cadet turned to look at. She could see in the crowd her face white with fear. The other cadets were grinning. They knew what was about to happen. Instructor considered the request for a long moment. Hoped he would refuse. She hoped he would see this for what it was, a larger cadet trying to humiliate a smaller one. But there was something in his 4 eyes that looked almost like curiosity. "Very well," said. "Cadet Monroe, you will spar with Cadet." The cadets formed a loose circle around the central mat, walked to her position and faced across the training surface. He towered over her. His gray armored skin could deflect blows that would shatter human bones. His muscles were dense enough to lift weights that could not even move. On paper, this was not a fair fight. It was not even close to fair. "Standard rules," announced. "First to 3 points or submission, begin." Did not wait. He surged forward before the last word left the instructor's mouth. His massive hand shot out and grabbed shoulder. She tried to sidestep, but he was faster than she expected. His other hand came around and shoved her hard in the chest. The blow lifted her off her feet. She hit the mat and rolled, coming up in a defensive crouch. Laughter rippled through the observers, was smiling, showing teeth that could bite through metal. "Get up, human," he said. "I want to see how many times you can fall." Rose and shoved her again, harder this time. She stumbled backward but kept her feet. He followed her across the mat, shoving her a third time. She went down again and the laughter grew louder. Something changed inside. She had spent her whole life being underestimated. She had fought for every opportunity she ever received. She had trained harder than anyone else just to be considered equal. And she was tired. She was tired of being pushed around. She was tired of being laughed at. She was tired of being treated like she did not belong. She remembered her grandfather's words. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. And the ones who rely on their size never learn to fight smart. Reached for her again. His massive hand came down toward her shoulder, the same grab he had used 3 times already. He expected her to retreat. He expected her to fall. He expected her to be weak. Did not retreat. She stepped forward into his reach, inside his guard. She dropped her center of gravity low, lower than he expected. Her hands caught his extended arm just above the wrist. She pivoted her hips and pulled, using his own momentum against him, using his own mass against him. For one perfect moment was airborne. His 800 pounds of muscle and armor became a liability instead of an advantage. Physics did not care how strong he was. Leverage did not care how big he was. Redirected all of that mass and all of that momentum into a single devastating throw. Hit the training mat with the force of a small explosion. The impact was so powerful that the reinforced polymer cracked beneath him. That mat had been designed to absorb impacts from species 3 times his size. It had never cracked before, not once in the entire history of the Academy. The training hall went completely silent. Every cadet stood frozen. They stopped laughing. Even instructor seemed unable to speak. Lay on the cracked mat, his 4 eyes blinking in confusion. He did not understand what had happened. He did not understand how something so small could generate so much force. He did not understand that strength was not the only thing that mattered in combat. Stood over him, breathing hard but steady. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were still. She had done it. She had actually done it. "Point to Cadet Monroe," said finally. His voice was different now. The dismissive contempt was gone. In its place was something that sounded almost like respect. The silence stretched on. Then slowly, the cadet began to clap. Other non-cadets joined in. The applause spread through the hall until it echoed off the walls. Rose to his feet, his expression shifting from confusion to rage. He stepped toward, but's voice cut through the air like a blade. "The match is over. Cadet, return to formation." For a moment thought would refuse. His 4 eyes burned with humiliation and fury. But even he would not defy a direct order from the instructor. He walked back to his place among the other and could feel his hatred following her like a physical weight. She had made an enemy today, a powerful enemy with a famous father and a wounded pride. But she had also done something that no human had ever done at the Academy. She had beaten him in combat, and everyone had seen it happen. The galaxy was about to learn what humans were really made of. The recording spread through the Academy like fire through dry grass. Someone had captured the entire fight on their personal device and uploaded it to the station network. Within hours, every cadet on the station had seen it. Within days, it had spread to coalition military channels across 3 sectors. Watched the video play on a screen in the mess hall. Someone had slowed it down and added analysis markers showing the exact mechanics of the throw. They had calculated the force of the impact. They had measured the trajectory of his body through the air. The numbers were impressive even to species who did not understand human martial arts. The cracked training mat had become something of a legend. Maintenance crews had replaced it, but someone had preserved the broken pieces. Heard rumors that they were being displayed in a case somewhere on the station. Evidence that a human had done the impossible. Demanded a rematch. He submitted formal requests to instructor 3 times in 2 days. Each time the instructor refused. Cadet Monroe achieved her point through legitimate technique, ruled. The match was conducted according to standard rules. If you wish to challenge her ranking, you must do so through the official tournament process. The official tournament was 6 months away, would have to wait, and in the meantime everyone would remember what had happened. Everyone would remember that he had lost to a human. Tried to keep a low profile, but it was impossible. Cadets from other species approached her constantly, asking questions about human combat techniques. How had she generated so much force? How had she moved so quickly? How had she known exactly where to grab his arm and exactly when to pivot? She explained as best she could. Humans had been developing martial arts for thousands of years. They had created hundreds of different fighting styles, each designed to give smaller fighters an advantage against larger opponents. Aikido, the technique she had used against, was specifically built around redirecting an attacker's energy. The harder someone came at you, the harder they fell. They did not understand. Their combat philosophy was based on strength and armor and overwhelming force. They had never needed to develop techniques for fighting larger opponents because they were almost always the largest opponents in any fight. The concept of using an enemy's power against them was foreign to everything they believed about warfare. 3 days after the incident, received a message summoning her to the office of commander. He was the academy commandant, the highest-ranking officer on the station. He was also expected disciplinary action. Embarrassing the son of a famous general carried consequences in any military organization. She prepared herself for punishment, maybe extra duties or restricted privileges or a formal reprimand on her record. She did not prepare herself for what actually happened. Commander's office was large and decorated with trophies from his long military career. Weapons from defeated enemies hung on the walls. Medals and commendations filled display cases. He was old for his gray skin faded to almost white and his 4 eyes clouded with age. But there was still power in his frame and intelligence in his gaze. "Sit down, Cadet Monroe," he said, gesturing to a chair that had been adjusted to human proportions. Someone had prepared for this meeting. Sat and waited. The commander studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "I have watched the recording of your match with Cadet 47 times," he said. "I have consulted with combat specialists from 6 different species. None of them can fully explain what you did." Was not sure how to respond, so she said nothing. "How long have humans practiced these techniques?" the commander asked. "Thousands of years, Commander. Different cultures develop different styles, but the basic principles are similar. We learned to fight enemies larger and stronger than ourselves because we had no other choice." The commander leaned back in his chair. "Tell me about your Earth has high gravity compared to many coalition worlds. Our environment was dangerous. Large predators, extreme weather, limited resources. We evolved without natural weapons or armor. No claws, no fangs, no protective scales. We survived through intelligence and cooperation and the willingness to keep fighting even when we should have lost." "You make yourselves sound weak," the commander observed. "We were weak," admitted. "Individually at least. A single human against a single predator was usually a dead human, but we learned to work together. We learned to use tools and weapons. We learned to study our enemies and find their weaknesses. We learned that strength is not the only thing that matters in a fight." The commander was silent for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was softer than before. "The coalition has underestimated your species. I have underestimated your species. For 15 years, we have treated humans as junior partners, too fragile and too primitive to contribute meaningfully to our military strength. I am beginning to think this was a serious error in judgment. Felt something shift in the room. This was not a disciplinary meeting. This was something else entirely. What happened in that training hall was not luck, the commander continued. It was skill. It was technique. It was the product of thousands of years of combat evolution that we knew nothing about. And if one human cadet can defeat one of our most promising young warriors, what could an army of trained human soldiers accomplish? He stood and walked to the window that looked out over the station's training facilities. Hundreds of cadets from dozens of species moved through the corridors below, preparing for the next day's exercises. I am going to recommend that human combat doctrine be studied at the highest levels of coalition military command, he said. Your people have something to teach us. I only hope we are wise enough to learn. Left the commander's office in a daze. She had walked in expecting punishment. She walked out with the knowledge that everything was about to change, not just for her but for every human in the coalition. The recording of her fight with continued to spread. Messages began arriving from human colonies across the galaxy, from soldiers and civilians who had seen the video and felt pride for the first time in their species' place among the stars. For 15 years, humans had been tolerated but never respected. That was finally starting to change. And it had all started with one cadet who refused to be pushed around anymore. Word of the incident spread far beyond the academy. It reached military command centers and political offices and diplomatic stations across coalition space. A human had defeated in single combat. The news was treated with disbelief at first, then curiosity, then something approaching concern. The military council requested a formal demonstration. They wanted to understand how a species they had dismissed as physically inferior could produce warriors capable of defeating their own kind. It was not a request that could be refused. Received orders to participate along with 8 other human cadets selected from various academy programs. 3 human instructors were brought in from military installations across coalition space. They were given 2 weeks to prepare a comprehensive presentation on human combat doctrine. The demonstration would take place in the Grand Arena, a massive facility normally reserved for graduation ceremonies and high-level diplomatic functions. Representatives from 30 coalition species would attend. The future of human involvement in coalition military operations could depend on what happened there. His brother Daniel arrived 3 days before the demonstration. He was 28 years old, 6 years older than, and he had served in Earth's Unified Defense Forces before transferring to coalition service. They had not seen each other in over a year. You look different, Daniel said when they met in the human dormitory common room. Stronger, more confident. Getting thrown around by aliens for 3 weeks will do that, replied. Daniel laughed, but his eyes were serious. Do you understand what this demonstration means? The whole coalition is going to be watching. If we fail, if we look weak or incompetent, it could set human integration back decades. And if we succeed? If we succeed, everything changes. Humans stop being the species that got lucky and start being a species that actually matters. The next 3 days were the most intense of life. The human team worked around the clock preparing their presentation. They rehearsed demonstrations and coordinated techniques and studied the physical capabilities of every species that might volunteer to spar with them. They could not afford any mistakes. The morning of the demonstration arrived cold and clear, stood in the staging area behind the grand arena, and tried to control her breathing. Through the walls she could hear the rumble of thousands of beings taking their seats. The largest audience she had ever faced was a classroom of 30 cadets. Today she would perform in front of representatives from across the galaxy. Daniel found her in the corner and put a hand on her shoulder. Remember what grandfather always said. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. These people have never seen what humans can really do. Today we show them. The presentation began with historical context. Human instructors stood before massive display screens and walked the audience through thousands of years of combat evolution. They showed recordings of ancient battles where smaller forces had defeated larger ones through superior tactics and determination. They showed footage of human athletes performing feats that seemed to defy the limits of their biology. They explained the philosophy behind human martial arts, the idea that strength could be redirected and size could become a disadvantage. The representatives watched with expressions that shifted from skepticism to interest to something that looked almost like unease. They were beginning to understand that they had missed something important about this small, fragile species. Then came the practical demonstrations. Human cadets took positions on the arena floor, and volunteers from other species stepped forward to test them. A warrior attacked teammate Price with all four arms and found himself on the ground in less than 3 seconds. A who outweighed human cadet Maria Santos by 200 pounds was forced to submit after she applied a joint lock that threatened to break his arm. One by one, the demonstrations proved the same point. Humans could fight. Humans could win, and they did it through technique and intelligence rather than brute strength. The final demonstration was. Her opponent was a lieutenant named Shen, who had requested the opportunity to face the human who had defeated. He was older than more experienced, and he had actually studied human fighting techniques after seeing the recording of their match. He would not be caught off guard by the same tricks. The arena fell silent as they took their positions, looked up at the massive warrior across from her and felt no fear. She had trained for this. She had prepared for this. And she knew something that Shen did not know. Human martial arts were not just a collection of tricks. They were a complete system of combat developed over. He might have studied a few techniques, but she had spent her whole life mastering them. The match began and Shen attacked with controlled aggression. He did not overextend. He did not leave himself open to throws. He had learned from his mistakes, adapted immediately, shifting to a different style, using strikes and pressure points instead of throws. She targeted nerve clusters that human anatomists had identified in physiology. She attacked joints that bent in ways his armored skin could not protect. The fight lasted 4 minutes. It was the longest 4 minutes of his life. She took hits that would have knocked out most humans. She was thrown twice and got up both times. She kept moving, kept attacking, kept finding new angles and new targets. The end came when she managed to get behind Shen and apply a chokehold that cut off blood flow to his brain. It was a technique that worked on almost every species with a centralized nervous system. She held the position until she felt his muscles go slack, then released him and stepped back. Shen collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. The arena was absolutely silent. Then slowly, he raised his head and looked at with something like wonder in his 4 eyes. "You are dangerous," he said, loud enough for his translator to broadcast to the entire arena. "Your whole species is dangerous, and we never saw it." He extended his hand and helped him to his feet. They stood together, the small human woman and the massive warrior, and for the first time in 15 years of coalition membership, humans were seen as equals. The applause started slowly but built until it shook the walls of the grand arena. Representatives from 30 species rose to their feet, saw commanders who had dismissed humans as weaklings standing and clapping alongside everyone else. She saw the commander of the academy, nodding at her with approval in his ancient eyes. And she saw, standing alone in the section, his expression unreadable as he watched the species he had mocked receive the recognition they had always deserved. Everything had changed. Nothing would ever be the same again. The formal integration of human combat doctrine into coalition military training took 2 years. There were committees and reviews and endless debates in the halls of power. Some species welcomed the new approach. Others resisted change. But the evidence was impossible to ignore. Humans had developed something valuable, and the Coalition would be foolish not to learn from it. Graduated from the academy with the highest combat scores ever recorded by a human cadet. She was not the strongest graduate, she was not the fastest, but she was the most adaptable, the most creative, the most impossible to predict. Those qualities had value that the Coalition was only beginning to understand. She was assigned to the Coalition Rapid Response Force, an elite mixed species unit that deployed to the most dangerous situations in known space. The unit operated on the front lines of Coalition territory, responding to crises that required warriors who could think as well as fight. Was the first human ever selected for the unit. She would not be the last. The day before graduation found her in the observation deck overlooking the training facilities. She had come to this spot often during her time at the academy. It helped her think. It helped her remember how far she had come. She tensed when she heard his heavy footsteps behind her. Their last encounter had not ended well for him, and she did not know what to expect now. But when she turned to face him, his expression was not hostile. It was something else, something she had never seen from him before. "I have studied your people's history," said without greeting. "The wars you fought among yourselves before you reached the stars, the challenges you overcame to survive on your world, the enemies you defeated despite having every disadvantage." Waited, she did not know where this was going. "My species conquered our world through strength," continued. "We were the largest and the most powerful creatures on our planet. We rose to dominance because nothing could stand against us. We never had to adapt. We never had to develop techniques for fighting enemies stronger than ourselves. We never had to." He paused and looked out at the training facilities below. Cadets from a dozen species moved through their exercises, following protocols that now included human martial arts alongside traditional combat training. "Your species had none of our advantages. You were small and soft and fragile. Every predator on your world was more dangerous than you, and yet you survived. You thrived. You built civilizations and technologies and eventually reached the stars, not through strength but through something else, something I am only beginning to understand." Turned back to face and extended his hand in the human gesture of respect. It was an awkward motion for someone with his physiology, but the intent was clear. "I do not know which path is more impressive," he said, "conquering through strength or surviving through adaptation, but I know that I was wrong about your species, and I know that the Coalition is stronger with humans in it." Took his hand. His grip could have crushed her bones, but he was careful, gentle even. "Maybe what matters is not how we got here, but what we do now that we are here, together." Nodded slowly. "Together, I think I would like to learn more about that concept." 10 years passed. The galaxy changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Periphery Wars, dormant for decades, erupted again along the Coalition's borders. An enemy alliance that called itself the Dominion launched coordinated attacks across multiple sectors. They outnumbered Coalition forces 3-1. They had been preparing for this war for generations. The first year was devastating. Coalition fleets were pushed back on every front. Entire systems fell to Dominion occupation. The military command that had dominated galactic politics for centuries found itself losing a war it had never expected to fight. But then things began to change. Small units operating behind enemy lines started disrupting Dominion supply chains. Resistance movements on occupied worlds made conquest impossible to maintain. Guerrilla tactics that larger species had never considered became the foundation of a new kind of warfare. Human tactics, human strategies, human stubbornness. Monroe was now Commander Monroe, leading the assault force that would attempt to break the Dominion siege at Prime. It was a desperate mission. The enemy held the high ground and outnumbered her forces 4-1. Traditional military doctrine said the attack was suicide. Human military doctrine said otherwise. Her second in command was a colonel named. He had requested assignment to her unit 5 years ago and had become one of her most trusted officers. They made an unlikely pair, the small human woman and the massive warrior, but they understood each other in ways that transcended species. "The enemy expects us to attack their fortifications directly," said as they reviewed the battle plan one final time. "They have prepared for a traditional assault." "Which is exactly why we are not going to give them one," replied. "We are going to do what humans do best. We are going to cheat." The assault on Prime became legendary. Forces used tunnels that had been dismissed as impassable. They attacked from directions that should have been impossible. They turned the enemy's own defenses against them, using captured weapons and equipment and supplies. They fought for 72 hours straight without rest, adapting to every countermove the Dominion threw at them. When the siege finally broke, the Dominion commander demanded to speak with whoever had planned the assault. He could not believe that such a small force had defeated his armies. He could not understand how it was possible. Stood before him in the ruins of his command center, surrounded by the coalition soldiers who had followed her through hell. "How?" the Dominion commander asked. "You had no advantages, no superior numbers, no overwhelming firepower. How did you win?" Thought about her grandfather and his advice about bigger enemies. She thought about lying stunned on a cracked training mat. She thought about all the times she had been told that humans were too small, too weak, too fragile to matter. "We never stop," she said. "We never stop fighting, we never stop adapting. We never stop getting back up when someone knocks us down. That is what humans do. That is what we have always done." The Dominion commander stared at her for a long moment. Then he lowered his head in surrender. News of the victory spread across the galaxy. It was the turning point of the war. Other battles followed, other victories, and within 3 years the Dominion was defeated. The coalition emerged stronger than ever, transformed by the integration of human tactics and human philosophy into its military doctrine. Retired from active service at the age of 42, she returned to the academy, not as a cadet but as an instructor. She trained the next generation of coalition warriors, teaching them that strength was not the only thing that mattered, teaching them that the smallest fighter could defeat the largest enemy if they were smart enough and determined enough and stubborn enough to keep trying. And whenever someone doubted her, whenever someone looked at her small human frame and questioned whether she belonged among the warriors of the galaxy, she would just smile and remember a training hall and a cracked mat, and a moment when everything changed. Humanity had not joined the stars because they were the strongest or the fastest or the most advanced. They had joined because they never gave up. They never backed down. They never accepted that they could not win. And when they hit back, the whole galaxy felt it.